The lights were blinding, the cameras were rolling, and in just 38 seconds, the interview collapsed into chaos. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's voice sliced through the studio like a blade, sharp and unyielding. "You don't care about people like me, Bill. You never have." Her words thundered against the walls, the kind that made viewers at home shift in their seats. Bill Maher, seated with the calm of a veteran who had weathered countless storms, gave only the faintest signal. A hand raised slightly toward the wings of the stage. Security took a step forward. The audience gasped, some in shock, others in delight, a few with nervous laughter that quickly died in their throats. The moment had turned electric, charged with something far heavier than politics. This was no longer a debate. It was a collision of worlds. Jasmine Crockett stood as a fiery disruptor, her passion raw, unrestrained, almost volcanic. Bill Maher embodied the opposite. Controlled, poised, institutional authority wrapped in measured sarcasm. Two figures, opposite poles of energy, locked in a duel neither planned to concede. "Calm down," Maher said, his voice deceptively soft, each syllable dipped in ice. But those words, meant as a warning, ignited Crockett further. She rose to her feet, fingers stabbing the air. "This is what you do. The moment someone speaks truth to power, you shut them down." Gasps rippled again. Security edged closer. For a split second, millions of viewers weren't watching a talk show. They were witnessing a morality play unravel live on air. To one side stood the disruptor who believed she was channeling a righteous fight. To the other, the host who clung to composure as his last weapon. It was drama too raw to script, too powerful to ignore. Crockett's fury was not just against Bill Maher. It was against the stage itself, the institution, the system she felt had mocked voices like hers for decades. Maher, with his calm restraint, became the symbol of that system, defending its walls with a smirk and a steady gaze. And yet, beneath the shouting and the tension, one question burned. How had it come to this? How had a late-night conversation turned into a spectacle of collapse, leaving the audience not laughing but breathless? To understand, we must rewind. Back to the calm before the storm. Before the shouting, before the gasps, before the signal for security, there was calm. A polished studio, gleaming under the glow of stage lights, promised another evening of clever conversation and sharp political wit. Bill Maher had built his reputation on exactly this. A stage where politicians, pundits, and cultural figures could spar without drawing blood, leaving the audience entertained, if not always enlightened. For decades, he had cultivated the image of the composed veteran, the man who could push boundaries without losing control. His audience expected him to be irreverent, cynical, even biting, but always in charge. On this night, the air in the studio felt almost celebratory. Viewers in the crowd had lined up for hours, hoping to witness another dose of Maher's trademark balance between humor and political theater. They weren't expecting fireworks, not yet. They were ready for a conversation, the kind of late-night exchange that might challenge ideas but never quite break the rules of civility. The set itself reflected that mood. Sleek wood panels, deep blues and golds, a desk that doubled as a barrier and a throne. Everything about the space radiated control. And then Jasmine Crockett entered. Her walk onto the stage carried a confidence that was undeniable. A congresswoman with a reputation for cutting through noise, she wore her presence like armor. There was a fire in her step, an urgency in her posture, a certainty that this platform was her chance to be heard on her own terms. Where Maher exuded control, Crockett radiated unpredictability. She was young, bold, and unapologetically herself. A disruptor stepping onto a stage built for institutions. The contrast was immediate, almost cinematic. The audience welcomed her warmly, clapping, some even cheering at her name. In that moment, there was no sense of impending disaster. If anything, the crowd leaned forward in anticipation of a spirited exchange. Something lively, maybe even contentious, but contained. Crockett smiled, waved, and settled into her chair. The image was one of poise, of confidence ready to meet Maher's seasoned composure head-on. But beneath the surface, currents of tension were already moving. Crockett's confidence wasn't just about making a point, it was about claiming space. She didn't arrive as a guest willing to be guided. She arrived as a force determined to be felt. To her, this wasn't just another talk show appearance. It was a battlefield where she could challenge not just Bill Maher, but the stage he represented. For Maher, the expectations were different. To him, she was another guest in a long line of fiery personalities. His role, as always, was to maintain the balance. Keep the laughs flowing, the conversation sharp, the control firmly in his hands. The contrast was subtle but decisive. Maher viewed the moment as performance. Crockett viewed it as confrontation. That tension, two people stepping onto the same stage with two entirely different agendas, hung invisibly between them. The audience couldn't see it, not yet. To them, it looked like another night of television. But for those watching closely, Crockett's eyes and Maher's posture told a deeper story. One carried the weight of disruption, the other the calm of authority. It was a clash waiting for ignition. And then came the first question. Simple, even routine. A nudge toward policy, a setup for banter. But the air shifted the instant the words left Maher's lips. Crockett leaned forward, her smile tightening, her eyes narrowing. The room seemed to sense the shift before the words even landed. Because sometimes it doesn't take an argument to break civility. Sometimes it takes only a question. But the very first question was enough to shatter the illusion of civility. The interview began the way they always did, with Bill Maher leaning casually against his desk, his tone light, almost disarming. His first question wasn't a challenge, not really. It was a softball, a gentle nudge meant to ease the Congresswoman into the rhythm of the show. He smirked and asked, "Congresswoman, what do you make of the current gridlock in Washington? Is there any way forward?" It was the kind of question dozens of lawmakers had fielded before her, the sort of prompt designed to spark a witty exchange, maybe even draw out a moment of candor. The audience settled into their seats, ready for the usual back and forth. But Jasmine Crockett didn't respond the way anyone expected. She leaned forward, her smile evaporating as if the question itself had been an insult. "Gridlock? Bill, that's a polite way of saying people in power don't care about communities like mine. You call it gridlock, I call it neglect." Her words were sharp, her tone edged with frustration. The crowd, caught off guard, murmured faintly, unsure whether to clap or remain silent. Bill's eyebrows lifted, but his posture remained steady. He gave a small chuckle, the kind he used to defuse tension, to signal that he wasn't rattled. "All right," he replied smoothly. "But isn't that just politics as usual? Doesn't every side feel neglected at some point?" To him it was a pivot back to safer ground. To her it was gasoline poured on an open flame. Crockett's voice rose, stronger now, charged with indignation. "No, Bill, this isn't about every side. This is about Black communities, about immigrant families, about people who keep this country running while elites sit back and laugh at our pain. You sit here night after night, acting like it's all a joke, like the suffering of millions is just content for your monologues." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some clapped hesitantly, a few let out approving cheers, but many sat frozen, sensing the temperature in the room climbing degree by degree. What had begun as an expected exchange was morphing into something raw, unscripted, and volatile. Bill tried again, his tone still even, though the flicker in his eyes betrayed his surprise. "Congresswoman, I think you might be reading a little too much into." "Don't tell me I'm reading too much." She cut him off, her voice slicing through his sentence. The sharpness of her interruption sent a ripple through the audience. Gasps mingled with a few scattered laughs, the kind born not from humor but from disbelief. Maher's face froze for a split second. He had faced combative guests before, but this was different. Crockett wasn't bantering. She was fighting, and the studio was becoming her battlefield. Every line she delivered came harder than the last, her anger no longer restrained but rising, wave after wave. "People like you think you can dismiss us with a smirk and a soundbite. But I'm not here to be dismissed. I'm not here to play your game. I'm here to call it out." Her finger jabbed the air, her eyes locked on Maher with a fire that demanded confrontation. She wasn't sparring with him, she was indicting him live in front of his audience and by extension the country. The audience fidgeted, some whispering, others glancing around as if to gauge how they were supposed to respond. Was this bravery? Was this disrespect? The line between the two blurred under the heat of the moment. Bill's composure remained intact, at least on the surface. He leaned back slightly, his body language calm, his voice measured. But that calmness only seemed to agitate Crockett further. To her it wasn't composure, it was condescension. His refusal to rise to her level of passion made it feel as though he was brushing her off, refusing to recognize the urgency of what she was saying. And that fueled her fire. "Do you think this is funny?" she demanded, her tone incredulous. "Do you think the people suffering under broken policies are just punchlines for your show?" Maher didn't laugh. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched, waiting for her to burn through her fury. But she didn't burn out, she only burned brighter. By now the room was heavy with tension. Some in the audience leaned forward, eyes wide, sensing that they were witnessing something far beyond entertainment. Others sat back, arms crossed, uncomfortable with the unraveling civility. The studio, once polished and predictable, now felt like a stage where two archetypes clashed. The unshakable institution and the relentless disruptor. Crockett wasn't just answering a question. She was delivering an ultimatum, a manifesto shouted through clenched teeth. Every word she spoke drove the wedge deeper between what the audience expected and what they were actually witnessing. And then, just when things couldn't get more uncomfortable, Jasmine escalated again. To understand the firestorm that erupted on Bill Maher's stage, we have to step back from the blinding lights and into the life of the woman at its center. Jasmine Crockett did not arrive in politics to play it safe. From the beginning, she was marked by the same qualities that erupted that night on television: boldness, defiance, and an instinct to break through the decorum that too often shields power from accountability. Born into a working-class family, Crockett carried with her the lived experience of the very communities she would later fight to represent. Her path to Congress was anything but polished. A lawyer by training, she cut her teeth defending clients who had been silenced, overlooked, or crushed by systemic inequalities. In courtrooms, she wasn't known for restraint. She was known for cutting through red tape with raw conviction. To her supporters, this made her a warrior. To her critics, it made her volatile. When Crockett ran for office, she leaned into this reputation. Her campaign speeches weren't crafted soundbites but fiery declarations. She spoke as if each sentence was a strike against injustice. Her words weapons meant to rattle rather than soothe. Crowds loved it. They saw in her the spirit of disruption that politics desperately needed. Someone unafraid to call out hypocrisy, even if it meant alienating powerful figures. And in Washington, she kept that same energy. While many new representatives enter Congress quietly, building alliances and learning the unwritten rules, Crockett arrived like a lightning bolt. In hearings, she clashed with senior members of the opposite party, refusing to yield when they tried to dismiss her. She raised her voice when told to be quiet. She demanded answers when others were content with rehearsed talking points. Every appearance became a spectacle, sometimes inspiring, sometimes polarizing. Her boldness was unfiltered, and her unfiltered style meant there was no script. One moment, she was celebrated as the voice of the unheard. The next, she was accused of undermining her own cause with outbursts that distracted from her message. Allies sometimes winced as she lashed out mid-hearing, cutting off colleagues. Opponents relished those moments, pointing to them as proof that she lacked discipline. Crockett knew this, of course, but for her, restraint was complicity. She carried the conviction that civility was often a mask for ignoring injustice. In her mind, being unapologetic wasn't just a personality trait. It was a moral imperative. If people flinched at her tone, good. Maybe they needed to feel uncomfortable. Maybe discomfort was the only way to shake a system that had grown too comfortable with its own failures. Yet that same defiance sometimes bordered on recklessness. In Washington, relationships matter. Bridges quietly built behind closed doors can deliver legislation that speeches alone cannot. But Crockett's instinct to swing first and never apologize meant bridges often burned before they were fully built. It left her isolated at times, celebrated on social media but questioned in the halls of power. Admirers loved her for speaking without fear. Detractors argued she mistook volume for victory. And this is the paradox that defined Jasmine Crockett. She embodied disruption, but disruption rarely arrives neatly packaged. She could electrify a crowd with a line that cut to the heart of injustice, but she could also derail her own arguments with anger that spiraled beyond control. Supporters saw bravery. Skeptics saw self-destruction. Both were true depending on the angle of the lens. That tension is what made her so captivating on Bill Maher's show. Viewers weren't just watching a congresswoman, they were watching a symbol. To some, she represented the righteous fury of those excluded from elite conversations. To others, she embodied the pitfalls of unchecked rage. Every raised voice, every pointed finger, every unfiltered accusation carried with it the story of a woman who refused to bend to the rules of political theater. The audience that night, sitting in the studio, could feel this paradox. When she lashed out at Maher, part of the crowd admired her guts. They saw courage in speaking truth to a powerful host, a refusal to be contained. But another part cringed. They wanted to root for her, but the spectacle felt unsteady, a fire burning too fast to control. And therein lies the emotional trigger. Jasmine Crockett was the disruptor America didn't know how to process. She was raw honesty and combustible energy, wrapped in a single figure. She demanded attention, but she couldn't always manage what came after. She gave voice to frustration, but sometimes drowned out her own message. That night on Maher's stage, all of those contradictions erupted at once. Her passion, her fire, her recklessness, they all collided under the heat of the cameras. She wasn't simply answering a question. She was carrying the weight of her backstory, the battles of Congress, the frustrations of communities who felt forgotten. But across the table sat a man who had faced down hundreds of difficult guests before.